welcome Neuro Ninjas to today's wellbeing workout. Today we're going to focus on why do we overthink? Why am I overthinking and what can you do about it? So we need to talk again about the mind-wandering network. A few wellbeing workouts ago we were talking about the mind-wandering network in one context. Now we're looking at it from another perspective. The mind-wandering network is also known by neuroscientists as the DMN, default mode network. It's a set of circuits across the brain that processes problems, basically, and we experience that processing of problems as mind-wandering. And it's one of the earliest networks to form, so it's the mind-wandering network. And here you can see a functional magnetic resonance image of the areas that are part of the mind-wandering network. So that mind-wandering network can run three kind of scenarios. It's modeling the world. It can be pessimistic and highly negative, and that's its default because that kept our ancestors alive in a dangerous ancestral environment. It can be optimistic and create best case scenarios, and it can be realistic and explore and imagine likely case scenarios. And basically, we need to think of our mind-wandering network in that way. Three flavors that run. If we're having a particularly complex and tricky experience, it's very intense at the moment. Our allostatic load is high, we've got a lot of incoming, we're feeling stressed and frazzled. We're going to experience a lot more pessimistic, negative thinking. And because we're in a neurally plastic brain, that's going to strengthen that circuitry, so we're more likely to be negative. And our brain has got a default towards negativity as well. So which kind of flavour of mind-wandering network do we end up with? It depends how we balance that experience. Now, if there's a lot of complexity happening in our lives, a lot of trouble and difficulty, we're likely to experience more negative thinking because the brain is worst case scenarioing to protect us from the worst case scenarios. So in order to balance that thinking, we need to deliberately do some optimistic thinking as well. So, okay, it might be this bad, but actually, what if it's not? What if something more positive happens? That act of positively thinking things through in a more optimistic best case scenario way can lead us to a balance and also create the opportunity for more realistic thinking. So it's not going to be terrible, it's not going to be amazing, it's going to be okay. So we can manage that mind space, manage the garden of our mind. And interestingly and strangely, the top of the brain, the DLPFC, the dorsal lateral prefrontal cortex, where our metacognition sits, our ability to look at our thoughts and not just get lost in them. That area of the brain gets the mind-wandering network stimulated and working harder when there's more complexity. And we might find we've got more negative thoughts with more complexity because our brain is throwing up negative scenarios precisely so we can avoid them. And what can happen in that situation is we're overthinking the bit at the back of the prefrontal cortex called the subgenual prefrontal cortex, which is very much focused on what's happening to me in relation to other people, what pressures I've got on me. It's very me focused. That can flood backwards into the mind-wandering network, and that excessive rumination can spread, filling the brain with dark and tricky thoughts, plunging us into a low mood, which can then generate issues of mood congruent emotional bias. So let me describe this. Memory is massively linked to the emotions that we're experiencing when we lay down a memory. So if we're feeling angry, our brain will resonate with anger and remind us of previous events that made us angry, deepening our feeling of anger, making us even more angry. If we're feeling sad, our brain will resonate with sadness, and memories linked to the emotion of sadness will tip out into the mind space, deepening our feeling of sadness and depression. So we're in this terrible downward spiral, and because we're using those circuits a lot, they're getting stronger and stronger and stronger. We need to gain insight. We need to travel up to the dorsal lateral prefrontal cortex. Walking outside can do that. Talking to a friend can do that. Making sure that we're engaged in a process of processing our emotions can do that, and more on processing emotions in another wellbeing workout. In that space, we can get stuck in this awful spiral. We have a difficult thought, we worry about the thought, we overthink it, and we end up accidentally strengthening the spiral. We're going around and around and down and down. So one of an important way of kind of accessing this and responding to this is When you don't feel like doing things, you stop doing things and you miss out on the brain-changing opportunity of doing whatever the thing was. And you end up feeling worse. So what we've got to try and hold in our head in those insight circuits when we're in a low mood and rumination is when you don't feel like doing things, do them anyway. The feelings of pleasure will follow and you will do more things. So when we're overthinking, we're stuck in cognitive distortions. We're in a really tricky space. We're having lots of negative worst case scenarios and we're not challenging them. We need to begin to challenge them. And we can give you support. If you're listening to this thinking, I'm stuck in that space, Andrew, what can I do about it? There's lots of things you can do. One thing you can do is use a what framework to catch the negative thought and then analyze it and apply the name of a cognitive distortion to it and transform that thought with talk or action. That's just the first of many steps that we could walk you through as we brought you out of rumination, brooding and overthinking. It's not your fault you're ruminating and brooding and overthinking. It's probably because of something that's happened to you or is happening to you. It might be the behaviour of other people. It might be from trauma from the past. So if you want some help, get in touch and we'll absolutely support you to respond to that rumination and brooding. Thanks for listening. We'll see you in next